poor girl was abandoned by her family until a billionaire CEO rescued her and changed her life forever. They told her she didn't belong, that she was just a mistake wrapped in secondhand clothes. On the night the moon was fullest, they locked the doors and set the table. And outside, barefoot on the gravel, she whispered thank you to the sky for giving her one more day to try. She had nothing, no name worth remembering, no hand to hold, until the man they feared most bent down and offered her his. And the world watched the girl they buried the night she wasn't invited. Some memories don't fade with time. They just learn how to sit quieter in the chest, like a stone in a deep river, still heavy. It was the Mid-Autumn Festival the night Jane Yates was told to leave. The kind of evening that made the southern sky feel warmer than usual. Candles flickered in every window of the Yates estate, and laughter spilled out onto the manicured lawn. Roast duck, spiced wine, lanterns that made promises they didn't keep. Inside the house, Claire stood in pearls and pressed silk, her smile painted on perfectly. And outside, on the steps, alone, Jane waited in a dress that had once belonged to someone else. She had tried. God knows she had. 3 weeks ago, her biological family had found her through a private investigator. After 17 years in foster homes, she'd gotten the call every abandoned child dreams of. You have a family, they want you home. Except home hadn't wanted her. You don't belong here, Claire had whispered that morning, and you never will. By evening, her school books had been torn, her name scratched off the place card at the dining table, and the necklace she never took off, a tarnished silver chain with a tiny moon pendant, was missing. Then came the breaking point. Claire had slipped and fallen by the fountain. Gold coins from their father's private vault had somehow spilled across the stones. She pushed me, Claire cried out. Jane did it. And that was all it took. Her father didn't ask. Her mother didn't blink. The housekeeper didn't even help her up from the gravel. You're not one of us, Harold Yates said coldly, and you never will be. Jane remembered the silence that followed, the kind that makes the crickets stop chirping, makes the sky lean in a little closer, like it knows what's about to be taken. She didn't beg, not this time. She walked to the iron gate barefoot, holding a duffel bag that carried everything she owned. 3 tattered novels, a sketch pad, and a single envelope with her real birth certificate. Behind her, the Yates family returned to their dinner. And in front of her, the world waited, quiet and cruel. And she had nowhere to go. And she walked anyway. And it wasn't until she passed the streetlight at the end of the driveway that she saw the man watching. He was sitting in the back of a black sedan, sharp suit, stillness like a blade. A man who belonged to power, the way fire belongs to heat. His driver opened the door, but he didn't step out. Not then. Not yet. Their eyes met for half a second, his unreadable, hers glassed with tears she refused to let fall. He'd remember her. But she wouldn't remember him. It's not until later. Not until he would be the one to give her back everything they'd taken. Because that man, Ryder Ward, wasn't just a CEO. He was the kind of man the Yates family feared most. And Jane? She was the girl they'd left behind. The one who would rise from the gravel and come back wearing her own name. Chapter 1. The Girl at the Gate. Stana, Georgia. It's autumn night. Yates family estate. The gates didn't creak when they closed behind her. They locked silent, final, like they'd been waiting all along to shut her out. Jane stood just beyond the wrought iron, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She didn't cry. Crying felt like something she used to do, before she learned that some girls were born without permission to ask for love. Behind her, the house still flickered with warm yellow light. Music drifted from the garden speakers, soft jazz and old standards that spoke of wine and wealth and people who'd never had to beg to be seen. She could still hear Claire's laughter, still smell the spiced duck and candied chestnuts from the family's banquet table. She pressed a hand to her ribs. Empty. Her stomach had been hollow for hours. But what stung more was the cold space where her necklace used to rest, a tiny silver moon she'd worn since foster care. The last gift from her real mother, gone, just like everything else. "You're lucky we even brought you here," Claire had hissed earlier in the upstairs hall. "If it were up to me, you'd still be picking gum off a school lunch table." Jane hadn't answered. She didn't need to. The bruises on her pride were, "You are our daughter," they'd said on the day they found her, but not their daughter. Because no matter how many silks her mother had laid out for her, or how many seats her father had promised to save at the table, Jane knew she wasn't there for love, she was there for shame, for guilt, for the biological daughter returned, a headline, a symbol, not a person. The fountain behind the hedges had been the breaking point. Claire had slipped, gasping theatrically, sending gold coins scattering like they were props in a bad play. The family had come running. Jane had tried to help, but Claire's scream cut through the air before she could speak. "Pushed me?" She tried to steal the coins. "Huh?" And just like that, her father's voice thundered, "You are not one of us." It didn't matter that Jane didn't push her. It didn't matter that Claire's tears dried too fast to be real. What mattered was the bloodline, the narrative, the decision they'd already made. And she was expendable. A car rolled past on the street behind her, headlights casting a long shadow on the pavement. Jane stepped out of the light instinctively, not out of fear, out of habit. You learn not to be seen when being seen only invites pain. She turned and walked, one step, then another, each crunch of gravel beneath her bare feet whispering a farewell she hadn't asked to give. She didn't know where she was going. Her phone had died hours ago. She had no friends left in Savannah, at least none she could call this late. Her sketchpad was the only thing that hadn't been stolen or locked away. At the end of the lane, a car was parked beneath a sycamore tree. Black, sleek, the kind of car that costs more than entire homes. The engine idled low, like a tiger purring in the dark. And that's when she saw him. He sat in the back seat, barely visible through the tinted window. But he wasn't slinking at his phone. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching her. Jane paused. The air felt heavier now, the breeze wrapped in some kind of gravity. The man didn't move, but something about his stillness unnerved her more than movement might have. His eyes followed her. Not in the way men at bus stops did, or boys at school did. There was no leer in it, no smile, just something else. Recognition. Curiosity. Or, maybe, memory. And she turned away, kept walking. She didn't have time for strangers, especially not ones in tailored suits and cars that cost more than her childhood. But as she passed his window, a voice inside her whispered something strange. "You've seen him before." She didn't turn back, didn't dare. Some things, some people, you only allow into your story once you know the ending, and she hadn't even figured out the middle yet. At the end of the street, the sky opened just enough to reveal the full moon, pale, indifferent, and impossibly round. Jane exhaled slowly and whispered to the night, "One day. Just give me one day to win." Then she disappeared into the dark. Across the street, inside the silent sedan, Ryder Ward leaned forward just slightly. His driver said nothing, neither did he. But in his hand, Ryder held something, a small bent moon pendant on a chain, found earlier that evening in the gravel drive, still warm. And in his chest, something moved that hadn't stirred in years. Recognition. And something dangerously close to sorrow. Chapter 2. Back to the beginning. Some say it happens in a flash. A car horn. A scream. Glass splitting open like thunder in your ears. But for Jane, the moment her world ended felt more like quiet. One minute she was crossing the dim intersection at Bay and Myrtle, the duffel bag slung heavy over one shoulder, her bare feet numb from concrete. The next, just silence. No impact, no pain. Just the strange weightlessness of floating and the whisper of something being undone. When she opened her eyes again, it wasn't rain she felt. It was light. Soft morning light warming her cheek, filtered through dusty blinds and paper-thin curtains. She blinked, once, twice. The air smelled like lavender and wood glue. Her back was pressed against something firm, old spring mattress, the kind used in group homes. Her eyes darted to the side. The peeling blue paint, the cracked mirror, the cardboard box labeled college applications. This was her old room. Not the Yates estate. Not the sterile guest wing where Claire made her sleep on a blow-up mattress and warned her not to touch the carpet. Jane sat up, fast. Her throat felt dry, her limbs trembled. She looked down, her arms were thinner, no fresh bruises, no dress. She was wearing her old hoodie, the one with the frayed drawstrings and fading high school crest. She leapt off the bed and stumbled to the calendar pinned to the wall. The date read September 1st. 3 weeks before the night the Yates family would invite her home. Her heart punched her ribs. This isn't possible. She searched for her phone. It was charging on the floor, just like it always was. The lock screen flickered to life. 6:42 a.m. Sept. 3 full weeks back. Jane staggered backward and collapsed onto the edge of her bed. A second chance? A reset? Or a cruel dream designed to break her twice? She pressed her palms into her face and whispered the only name that ever brought her peace. Esther? But Grandma Esther, the closest thing Jane ever had to real family, had died last year. She'd been a church janitor with tired hands and a voice like honey steeped in truth. Jane could still hear her saying it. Blood don't make family, baby girl. Love does. Maybe that's why the Yates had failed so badly. They thought the blood would do all the work. Jane stood slowly. She walked to the closet, slid the door open. Her old art portfolio was still there, tucked behind a row of 2 small shoes and a box of dried-up markers. She reached for it. Inside, the sketches were untouched, her dreams in graphite and ink. A necklace shaped like a teardrop, a city skyline laced in vines, a dress made of magnolia petals and glass. Designs no one ever cared about, except her. And now, she had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to rewrite everything. 3 weeks to never step foot in the Yates house. 3 weeks to prove herself on her own. Later that morning, she sat on the steps of her public high school, watching the first wave of students arrive. The air buzzed with the usual noise, slamming lockers, shouted names, the slap of sneakers against tile. Her fingers were curled around a copy of the upcoming National Merit Exam schedule. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to dominate. She was still reading when a shadow fell across her page. "You okay?" a familiar voice asked. Jane looked up into the freckled face of Maya Thompson, one of the only friends she'd kept from the foster years. Maya blinked. "You look like you saw a ghost." Jane smiled faintly. "Something like that. You coming to homeroom?" "In a minute." Maya hesitated. "You know, I heard the Yates family is coming to school next week. Some private family scholarship announcement thing, fancy cars, security guards, whole 9 yards. Jane's stomach turned. "They're still coming." "I don't care," she said quietly. "They don't matter." Maya grinned. "That's the spirit. Let the rich folks keep their secrets." By noon, Jane was back in the library, sitting cross-legged in the farthest corner with a tower of textbooks and 2 sharpened pencils. Every mock exam she could find, she devoured. When she wasn't studying, she was sketching. And when she wasn't sketching, she was dreaming of earning her place, not being given it. The days blurred class, silence, effort. She stopped going to lunch, stopped checking social media. She didn't care what Claire posted. She didn't care what the world thought. All she cared about was the scoreboard. All she wanted was one thing: to never need their name again. 3 weeks later. The morning of the National Merit Exam dawned cold and still. Jane arrived early, her duffel bag packed with extra pencils, water, and the necklace she'd just found again resting at the bottom of her sketch folder. The chain was broken, but she tied it together with a bit of string. It still smelled faintly of cedar. Like Grandma Esther. Before she entered the testing hall, she looked up at the sky. A full moon was fading in the daylight, faint but visible. She took a breath. "I'm ready," she whispered. What she didn't know was that Ryder Ward, seated in his penthouse office downtown, was reading the finalist list. And one name had just appeared at the top. Jane Astor Yates, 751, 750. He leaned back in his chair. His assistant, confused, asked, "Sir, you okay?" Ryder didn't answer. He just stared at the name for a long, long time. And then he picked up the phone. The score she never... The test results came out on a Wednesday. It was early morning when Jane walked into the school office, backpack slung low, expecting to be ignored like always. The secretary barely looked up, tapping her keyboard. "You here for results?" she asked. Jane nodded. "Name?" "Jane Yates." The secretary froze. She blinked, typed something again, and looked up slowly. Really looked this time. Her eyes scanned Jane's hoodie, her tangled braid, her bitten-down fingernails. "You're the Jane Yates." "A beat. I guess so." The woman stood, left the desk, and came back holding a sealed envelope. "Principal Woodard wants to see you." Jane's heart skipped. Did something go wrong?" "I don't think wrong is the word, honey," she said. "Go on now." Principal Woodard's office smelled like lemon polish and old trophies. The shelves were stacked with framed photos of past graduates. None of them looked like Jane. He stood when she entered, tall and broad-shouldered in a gray wool suit that made him look more like a judge than an educator. "Miss Yates," he said, "please, sit." She sat, clutching the envelope like it might disappear. He smiled. "You broke the record, Jane." What? 151 out of 750. You earned the bonus point for your response to the moral reasoning section. The committee called it philosophical and emotionally mature beyond her age. But she stared at him. "We want you to speak at the state banquet next month." "No one's going to want me up there," she said too quickly. "I'm not polished. I'm not..." He cut her off gently. "You earned it. That's what matters. You changed this school's history." He pushed a second envelope across the desk. "This is an offer from the Horizon Foundation. They're sponsoring a full-ride design scholarship. They chose you, Jane, not just because of your scores. They've seen your sketches." Jane blinked. "I never submitted them." "No," he said, smiling softly, "but someone did." The envelope sat unopened in her lap as she walked home in the late September light. The sun cast long shadows over the sidewalk, and the wind had started to carry the first hints of cinnamon and dry leaves. Scholarship, the banquet, her name, finally not attached to pity, but to excellence. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. A text blinked across the screen from an unknown number. "Meet me, corner of Monroe and Oak, 6:00 p.m. R." She stared at the initials. Ryder Ward. The name felt like thunder, low and quiet and too dangerous to ignore. At 6:00 p.m., Jane stood on the corner in a denim jacket that didn't quite block the... She expected a town car. Or a handler, maybe an assistant in a blazer and clipboard. Instead, a single man stepped out of a coffee shop holding 2 cups. He was taller than she remembered. His eyes were a pale gray blue, the kind that saw too much and gave too little away. No entourage, no arrogance. He handed her a cup. "Peppermint hot chocolate. I read that's your favorite." Jane hesitated. "How do you know that?" "I read your old essays, the ones from middle school, on the public server." She gave him a look. "I fund the Horizon Foundation," he said simply. "I also bought the high school database system last year." "You spy on students?" "I invest in promise," he replied. "You stood out." She crossed her arms. "You're wasting time. I'm not a brand." I don't want to use you, Jane. I want to offer you something. With a life where you're not hungry, not silenced, not erased. She stared at him, unsure whether to be moved or insulted. He softened. Your score didn't surprise me. What did was the way you wrote about forgiveness, about choosing peace even when it isn't given. Her voice cracked. They're already trying to claim me. The Yates. They told the news I was part of their family, that they always knew I was gifted. I know. We only brought me back for a press release. I know that too. She looked away. So, what do you want from me? Help you become so powerful, they'll never be able to rewrite your story again. She blinked. Why? Because I've seen what happens when good people are left behind. He held out a simple card. Ryder Ward, founder, Horizon Foundation, CEO, Loxley Design Group. And a back a handwritten note. You're ready to choose yourself. Then he walked away. He didn't ask for thanks. Didn't linger. Didn't look back. Lyndon said, What? That night, Jane opened the first envelope. A $300,000, 0 cents scholarship. Mentorship at Loxley Group. Housing in New York City. Valid for 1 year, only redeemable if accepted before October 5th. She read it 3 times before sliding it under her pillow. At school the next morning, something had shifted. Kids stared in the halls. Whispers followed her like smoke. Even the teachers seemed dazed. One student had printed out the top scores and taped them to the lockers. There it was, bold and undeniable. Jane observed her yelling husband of 751. Claire Yates's name. Wasn't even in the top 10. When Jane walked into art class, her usual seat had been taken. By Claire. Hello, Claire said sweetly, looking up from Jane's own sketchbook. Didn't realize this was your seat. I just figured you'd be gone by now, off to your designer castle in New York. Jane didn't answer. She walked to the front of the class and dropped her bag. Claire followed. You think you're special because of one test? You think Ryder Ward gives a damn about you? Jane looked up. I don't need him to. Claire smirked. You're still poor, still nobody. Jane smiled, just once, and said softly, Then why are you still trying to be me? Chapter 4. The day he noticed her. Savannah's River Street Market had a rhythm of its own. Vendors shouting from behind wooden stalls, the scent of roasted chestnuts curling through the autumn air, and the echo of gospel singers rising from the cathedral steps. It was the kind of place you passed through, not lingered in. Unless you were waiting for something you didn't know how to name. Jane stood in front of a flower cart holding a single $5 bill. In her other hand, a brown paper bag with 2 peanut butter sandwiches, a plastic bottle of water, and the scholarship offer that felt too good to be real. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Maya. There was something sacred about it still, a small, flickering thing she wanted to protect. Behind her, a voice cracked through the noise. Move, lady. We don't have free samples today. Jane turned. An elderly woman dressed in threadbare linen and bent with time stood beside the bakery stall, holding a worn coin purse and a small slice of raisin bread in shaking hands. I was just asking if they had day-old pastries, the woman whispered. The vendor rolled her eyes. Yeah, and I asked for customers who didn't smell like mold. Keep it moving. Jane didn't think. She just stepped forward. Excuse me, she said gently, slipping the bill into the woman's palm. Here, it's not much, but you deserve better than that. The woman looked at her, eyes wet. Child, are you sure? Jane smiled. I've been on both sides of that counter, I promise. Today, I'm on this side. Then she placed the sandwiches beside her and helped the woman into a chair under the shade. Water too, it's warm today. And without another word she turned and walked away. Across the street, behind tinted glass, Ryder Ward watched. He hadn't meant to stop. His driver was taking a call. Ryder had simply glanced up from a tablet, distracted, detached. And then he saw her. Same girl, same braid, same eyes. The girl from the Yates estate driveway, the one who'd walked into the night barefoot and unbowed. He didn't know her name, not then. But something about the way she crouched next to the woman, the way she gave without expectation, it rattled something in him, something old, something long buried. He remembered another girl, another fall, another night. 12 years ago. Savannah General Hospital lobby. Ryder was 17 and numb from his father's funeral. He'd just been handed power he didn't want and a future mapped out like a prison sentence. While adults argued in polished suits and glossy shoes, he'd slipped away into the hospital chapel. And there, sitting alone, crying quietly into a juice box, was a girl. She was maybe 6. Her shoes. She looked up and smiled at him. "Are you here for your grandma too?" He blinked. "No, my father." She nodded solemnly. "Did he leave?" "I'm sorry," she said, sincere as prayer, "but if you sit next to me, I can share my sandwich." He hadn't eaten in hours, but more than that, he hadn't been seen in days. Not really. So he sat beside her, and they didn't speak again. They just sat. 2 ghosts. 2 kids. Both waiting for someone who wouldn't come back. When he looked away, she had drawn a picture in the fog of the chapel window. A house with stars and a girl standing outside, waving at a crescent moon. She whispered something then. Something that came back to him now like a whisper through time. Sometimes the moon is all you get, and sometimes it's enough. Back in the car, present-day Ryder blinked hard. His chest ached in a way that felt too close. "Sir?" his driver asked softly. "We're ready." He didn't answer right away. "Do you believe in fate, John?" he murmured. The driver gave him a look in the mirror. "You don't pay me to believe, sir." "No," Ryder said quietly, "but I might start." He tapped the screen of his phone, typed a message, sent it to the Horizon Foundation's board. "Find me the girl who just gave her lunch to a stranger." That night, Jane returned to the small apartment she rented from the church secretary's cousin. It was little more than a kitchen, a couch, and a mattress on the floor, but it was hers. She dropped her bag, peeled off her jacket, and pulled out her sketch pad. Inside was a drawing she'd done the night after the Yates threw her out, one she hadn't been able to finish. A girl standing outside a gate, not long enough to be let in, but just standing tall. She sharpened her pencil and began to draw. Across town, in the marble penthouse suite of Loxley Tower, Ryder opened a velvet throw drawer. Inside it, wrapped in cloth, was a child's drawing on a paper napkin. A gate? A girl standing alone. On the back, "Even if no one lets me in, I'll still smile at the stars." He hadn't known her name, not until today. But now he did. And he would never forget it again. Chapter 5. The Test. The test had been graded. A list had been published. And Jane Yates had won. Not just won, obliterated. 751 out of 750. A perfect score. +1. The school board didn't know what to do with it. The SAT committee called it an anomaly of grace and intellect. The city papers ran it under bold headlines like, "Savannah Girl redefines excellence. Top score in state belongs to who?" But Jane? She kept showing up to school, the same way she always had, quiet, late, and invisible unless someone wanted something. Until one morning, she wasn't. The assembly had been announced 2 days prior. A citywide event honoring exceptional students streamed live to local news. "Bring your parents," Principal Woodard said with a warm smile. Jane didn't. She brought her sketchbook instead. Her real family. The people who mattered were either dead, missing, or out there somewhere, still believing in her. She took a seat near the back of the auditorium, in a folding chair that wobbled slightly on the gym floor. Claire Yates arrived with fanfare, wearing pearls, her father's arm looped through hers, a local reporter in tow. Susan Yates waved like a senator's wife. The school board whispered her name like prophecy. "I think it's Claire," Maya whispered beside her. Jane didn't answer. She simply pulled her hoodie tighter and opened to a blank page in her sketchbook. On stage, the principal stepped to the microphone. Behind him, a screen displayed the official crest of the city's education board. "We are here today," he began, "to honor an achievement not just of brilliance, but of resilience, creativity, and heart." A murmur spread through the crowd. "Today's top scorer didn't come from a prep school," he continued. "She didn't have a tutor or a private coach. She came from the public system, from this very hallway. She came in early, stayed later, and never asked for a spotlight." He turned toward the screen. A name appeared in bold. Jane answered the knock. A 751 silence. Then an audible gasp. Then applause. Hesitant at first, then roaring. Jane looked up slowly. Claire had gone pale. "Mrs. Yates," the principal called gently, "will you come up and receive your award?" Jane stood, her knees shook slightly. But she walked anyway. The moment her sneaker touched the stage, 1,000 things happened. Cameras flashed. Whispers rippled. And Ryder Ward, seated in the back row with tinted sunglasses and no name tag, smiled. Jane took the plaque in shaking hands. The principal stepped back, gesturing to the mic. "Would you like to say a few words?" She nodded once, cleared her throat, and looked out over a crowd full of faces that had never really seen her. "My name is Jane Yates," she said softly. "Some of you know me as the quiet girl, the one who sits in the back, the one who eats lunch in the art room. That's me." A few chuckles. "I also want you to know this. I didn't get here because of luck, or blood, or money. I got here because every time someone closed a door, I found another way in. And because I had one person who once told me, 'Baby girl, the world don't get to decide your worth. That's between you and God.'" Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. "I don't come from power. I come from perseverance, and I'm proud of that." The applause this time was louder. When she stepped off stage, the crowd stood, and Claire Yates folded her program in half. Hard. Ryder waited in the hallway near the side exit. He didn't approach her in front of cameras. He waited until she pushed open the door, away from the noise, and leaned against the cool brick wall in the alley behind the gym. "You did it," he said softly. She didn't flinch. "You were there," she said, not a question. She turned toward him slowly. "Why?" "Because I wanted to see the moment they realized what they lost." Jane exhaled. The night air was crisp and smelled of oak and city dust. "They're going to twist it," she said. "They already are. Claire's dad has reporters calling me the forgotten daughter who rose under their roof." "Let them try," Ryder said. "It's your voice they'll remember." She looked at him. "You always show up after," she said. "After the test, after the market, after the banquet. Would you rather I show up before?" She shrugged. "I don't need a savior." "Ah," he agreed, "but every general deserves backup." Jane bit her lip. He pulled something from his pocket, her old sketch, folded and worn from the drawing board. "The Horizon Foundation is offering a private mentorship," he said. "1 year, New York City, Loxley Design Group. You'd have your own space, your own voice, and no one would dare take credit for your work again." She looked down at the drawing, her necklace design, the one she drew after the Yates called her a thief. "How long do I have to decide?" "Till Friday." She nodded slowly, and handed him back the sketch. "I'll bring the rest. When I'm ready?" She nodded once, tucked the paper away. As he turned to go, she called out, "Ryder?" He turned. "Why me?" He paused, then answered, Because I remember what it's like to be the smartest person in the room and still be made to feel invisible. And then he was gone. Back in the auditorium, the Yates family smiled politely for photos. Reporters kept asking Claire how it felt to live with such a brilliant. Claire kept smiling, but her jaw was tight. Backstage, Jane watched from the wings. She didn't step into the spotlight. Not yet. She didn't need it. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the test. And she had passed. Chapter 6. The dinner that changed everything. It was called the Founders' Banquet. Held once a year at Savannah's grandest ballroom, the Yates family attended it like church. Gold invitations, crystal chandeliers, white gloves and wine lists printed in cursive. The city's most powerful families mingled over veal and vintage champagne. This year, the theme was Legacy Through Learning. Claire Yates, seated at the center of the Yates table in a beaded gown, had every reason to believe it was her night. After all, she had come in second. And second, in her world, had always been more than enough as long as Jane wasn't first. But Jane was first now. And she was coming. Jane stood alone at the top of the stairs outside the ballroom, wearing a black dress that had once belonged to her late grandmother. No frills, no designer tag, just clean lines and quiet confidence. Her name was on the guest list, not as an addition, but as a guest of honor. Ryder had made sure of that. "You don't have to come," he had told her that morning, voice low through the phone. "I know," she'd replied, "but I want them to see me, really see me." Inside, the air buzzed with the low hum of string instruments and the sharper murmur of judgment. When Jane stepped through the grand entrance, heels echoing on marble, all conversation faltered. Claire's wine glass paused mid-air. Harold Yates turned red. Susan blinked as if she were seeing a ghost. And at the head table, Ryder Ward stood. Every eye followed Jane as she walked the length of the ballroom. But she didn't stop at the back. She walked all the way to the front and took the empty seat beside him. He pulled out her chair. No hesitation. And when she sat, he said just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "I've been waiting for you." The MC tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's keynote speaker needs no introduction, but she deserves one." He turned to the front table. Top scorer in the state, future designer, and the first public school recipient of the Horizon Award. Please welcome Jane Esther Yates. There was no podium, no teleprompter. Just Jane, standing before Savannah's elite, wearing a dress from a thrift store and carrying the calm of someone who's already survived worse than silence. She took a breath and began. "I didn't grow up knowing where I belonged," she said. "For a long time, I believed belonging was something you earned by being quiet, by being easy, by being grateful for whatever you were given, even if it wasn't love." A hush fell. But then I learned something else, that real belonging doesn't come from bloodlines or bank accounts or how well you smile when someone cuts you down. It comes from choosing who you are every day. She looked toward the Yates table. Claire was still smiling, but her knuckles were white on the linen napkin. "My name is Jane Esther Yates. I carry that name because someone chose to give it back to me. Not out of obligation, out of belief. And I carry it with pride, not because of who abandoned me, but because of who didn't." Applause. Not just polite. Sustained. And when Jane sat down, Ryder leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just walk through the door, you rebuilt it." Later during dessert, a server approached the Yates table. "Miss Jane," she said, "there's a woman in the lobby who says she's your mother." Jane paused. She stood and walked into the lobby. Susan Yates waited by the entrance in a gray shawl and an expression that wavered between regret and panic. "I didn't know you were speaking," she began. Jane looked at her, quiet. "Yes, you did. You just didn't want to be seen sitting beside me." Susan flinched. "I made mistakes. but I never stopped thinking of you as my daughter." "No," Jane said calmly. "You stopped thinking of me the minute I didn't fit your picture." She took a breath. "This isn't revenge, it's release. You don't have to lie anymore, and I don't have to wait for you to love me right." Then she walked back inside and didn't look back. Later that evening, as the ballroom emptied and the lights dimmed, Ryder found her by the balcony. The river below shimmered in the moonlight. "You were brave tonight," he said. "9," she replied. "I was ready." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Jane turned to him. "Why me, really?" He met her eyes. "Because the first time I saw you, you were alone, and you were still choosing kindness." He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small. The moon pendant. Leaned, restored, restrung. "I think you dropped this," he said. Jane took it, fingers trembling just a little, and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Ryder smiled. "You found yourself, Jane. I just watched." Chapter 7. Severance. The letter had been written weeks ago. Folded, sealed, stamped in quiet courage. But today was the day she delivered it. Jane stood outside the Yates Law Group Tower in downtown Savannah. It looked more like a museum than affirmed columns, stone lions, gold leaf names carved above the doors. The same place that once turned her away when she asked about her birth record. She walked through the lobby like someone who knew where she belonged, because she did now. The elevator chimed on the top floor. A receptionist looked up. "Miss Jane Yates," she said. "I'm here for a scheduled filing." The woman blinked. "You're on the docket." And she was shown into the conference room. Harold Yates was already there, arms folded behind his back, flanked by two lawyers in matching pinstripe suits. Clara sat near the end of the table, scrolling through her phone. Susan didn't come. That was fine. But this was never about them. "Jane," Harold said coolly, "to what do we owe this dramatic visit?" Jane didn't sit. She opened her bag and removed a single document. "I'm filing a legal severance," she said. "I'm formally severing all ties to the Yates family, financial, biological, and public." Claire snorted. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Jane said calmly, "that you no longer get to claim me, in interviews, in fundraisers, in speeches about second chances." Harold leaned forward. "You think you can just wipe away lineage?" "I'm not wiping it," she said. "I'm rejecting it." She slid the document across the table. "Already reviewed, already signed. The state accepts legal severance under adult emancipation clauses when psychological harm can be reasonably demonstrated. And it has." One of the lawyers began to protest. Jane reached into her bag again, this time pulling a slim white envelope. "Here's a notarized letter from my former counselor, confirming systemic emotional neglect, verbal abuse, and financial coercion. Would you like me to read it out loud?" Claire's smirk disappeared. Harold's knuckles whitened. Jane continued. "There's also a cease and desist. Your PR team has used my name in 6 media pieces since the SAT banquet. Going forward, you are not authorized to use me in any campaign, family tree, or statement." "You think this makes you strong?" Harold said. "No," James said softly. "It makes me free." The room went quiet. Then Claire stood up, her voice brittle. "You think this makes you better than us?" Jane looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "I just stopped trying to be like you." Then she turned to the attorney. "I'll need your signatures today." "I won't sign this," Harold growled. Jane smiled. "You don't have to. The court will accept your silence as waiver of opposition, and frankly, I'd rather not see your handwriting on something I'll be framing." She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "Alone? And Claire?" The girl looked up, defensive. "Your scholarship essay, the one about resilience in the face of poverty?" Jane pulled a file from her bag and dropped it on the table. You plagiarized mine from last year, word for word. I've already informed the board. Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Outside the firm, Jane breathed deep. The air was warmer now. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. That afternoon, Jane sat in the park with Maya, the sun pressing through the trees in soft stripes. "You really did it?" Maya asked, eyes wide. "Like cut them off?" Jane nodded. "You're insane," Maya whispered. Jane smiled. "Maybe, but I'm finally not invisible." They sat in silence. Then Maya nudged her. "So, what now?" Jane looked down at the moon pendant resting against her collarbone. She said, "Now I write my own name on every door they close." That evening, a courier knocked on Ryder Ward's office door. He looked up from his laptop. "From Jane," the man said simply. Ryder opened the envelope. Inside, not a letter. A sketch. A photograph. Faded, bent, of a little girl in a blue dress, holding up a hand-drawn necklace to a window, the moon behind her like a crown. On the back, one line. "I remember who I am now. Thank you for waiting." He held the photo for a long time, then picked up his phone. "Already prepare the internship space. She'll need sunlight, and silence, and room to grow." Name for the file? Georgian Esther Yates, Founders Cohort, no longer temporary. Chapter 8. The Invitation. New York City smelled like ambition. It hit you the moment the plane wheels touched down, before you even left the gate. Somewhere between the flicker of taxi lights and the press of strangers, Jane felt it. The rhythm of people building empires with coffee-stained hands. And for the first time, she felt like she belonged. The Loxley Design Group headquarters was everything she imagined and nothing she expected. All glass and gravity, perched on the edge of Manhattan's design district like a promise whispered through steel. Floors lined with original sketches, a private garden on the roof, a silence that made you want to create. She arrived in a borrowed coat, hugging her sketch pad like armor. "Jane Yates," a voice asked behind the reception desk. They turned. The woman wore heels like weapons and red lipstick like war paint. "I'm Elise. I'm your mentor." Jane blinked. "I thought Ryder Ward was." "Signs the checks. I sign the praise. Come." They walked past portfolios worth 6 figures, past people who'd studied in Paris and Milan, past a boy sketching with such focus, Jane forgot how to breathe. "Is this real?" she whispered. Elise smiled. "It's yours, if you're ready to earn it." They stopped outside a room labeled Founders Cohort Studio, Jane Esther Yates. Jane froze. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on the door, heart pounding. Inside, a room full of light. Blank walls, fresh pencils, a work table with her name etched into the wood, and a single framed photo resting near the window. Her sketch of the moon pendant. She stepped in slowly. Touched the chair, the desk, space that was hers. Then whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. That night, she sat on the windowsill of her apartment, a studio Ryder had arranged, overlooking the river, and called Maya. "I'm scared," she said. "Of what?" "Of being good enough, of not being ready, of this all disappearing." Maya's voice was soft. "It's not a dream, Jane. It's your work finally catching up to your worth." Jane closed her eyes. I don't want to waste it." "You won't, under." Days passed in pencil lines and coffee cups, in critiques and revisions, in emails that began with, "Jane, this is brilliant," and ended with, "Can we show this to the board?" She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was creating. And the world was noticing. 2 weeks later, she received. It wasn't on letterhead, no gold seal. Just a hand-dressed envelope left on her desk. Inside, a single sentence, written in Ryder's exact, elegant script. "Your story deserves a gallery." and beneath it, "You're invited to debut your first collection at the Winter Design Expo. 1 month, your name, your vision, your rules." She read it 3 times before whispering, "It's Maya," and she called Maya again. "I want me to lead the closing night." Maya screamed. Jane laughed, then sat on the floor, clutching the invitation to her chest like a secret. Because no one had ever invited her to be seen before. Not like this. In Savannah, the Yates estate sat quiet, till the news broke. New York Expo names Jane Yates as closing designer. Top scorer turns designer to watch. Harold choked on his coffee. Susan spilled her tea, and Claire threw her phone. That night, Ryder visited the Loxley rooftop garden. Jane stood alone, sketching by the light of a lantern. "I said yes," she told him. "I knew they would." "You sure?" "Jane," he said, walking closer, "you don't belong to the world they tried to bury you in. You never did. And now, you're the one drawing the map." She looked up. "Will you be there?" "I'll be in the front row." She smiled. "Good. I think I need someone to remind me I'm not dreaming." "You're not dreaming," Ryder said. "Then why does it still hurt?" "Because the people who should have loved you didn't, and the people who shouldn't have mattered." She turned her sketchbook toward him. A girl standing at the edge of a spotlight, one step away from the stage. "What's she waiting for?" he asked. Jane whispered, to realize she was never small. Much a 9, the ring she kept. The Winter Design Expo smelled like velvet and rain. Outside, snow had just started to fall. Inside, the gallery pulsed with music and quiet wonder, a maze of crystal cases and spotlights that made diamonds look like stars. Jane stood behind a sheer white curtain, her breath fogging the mirror in front of her. Her hair was pulled into a soft bun. Her gown, simple, black silk, felt like armor. It was the last night of the show, and her collection would close it. Her pieces weren't loud, they weren't soaked in excess or shock. They were quiet. A necklace made of twisted silver vines, inspired by a childhood swing. A bracelet engraved with the latitude and longitude of Savannah. A brooch that looked like the window frost she used to draw faces in. And at the center, on a pedestal in a glass case, her final piece. A ring? One she had designed after a dream, after a memory, after a goodbye. Small, delicate, bowl spun with a thread of moonstone and a carved phrase on the inside. "Even in the dark, you were still mine." She hadn't told anyone what the ring meant, but she had never stopped drawing it. The show director walked in. "Jane, you're on in 2. She nodded. "Thank you." She turned once more to the mirror and whispered, "You're not the girl at the gate anymore." When she stepped into the light, silence fell. Hundreds of eyes, dozens of cameras, reporters, buyers, designers, critics. And there, on the far left, Ryder, standing, hands in his pockets, watching only her. She stepped to the mic. "My name is Jane Esther Yates," she began, voice steady. "I grew up in borrowed homes, in secondhand clothes. I used to sketch on the backs of napkins and sell bracelets to pay for lunch. People told me my hands weren't made for luxury, that kindness wasn't power." She paused. "I've learned that the strongest things are often quiet, that the most valuable stories aren't always shouted. Some are whispered in silver and carried in rings you never take off." She stepped toward the pedestal. "This is my final piece," she said. "It's called The Ring She Kept." Flashbulbs flickered. But Jane wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at Ryder. And only Ryder. Later, after the crowd had cleared and the exhibits had dimmed, she stood in the middle of the gallery alone, until she felt him beside her. "You didn't mention the inscription," Ryder said quietly. "No," Jane said. "Some things aren't for everyone." Was it for someone? She looked down at the ring, then up at him. It was for the girl who stayed when everyone else left. Ryder nodded once, then stepped closer. You said at the banquet that someone gave your name back to you, he said. Was that me? Jane smiled softly. No. His face changed slightly. She stepped forward, reached for his hand, and placed the ring in his palm. It was me, she said, but you reminded me I could. His eyes didn't leave hers. And then, without flourish or fanfare, he said, I've been in love with you since the night you gave away your last. Jane laughed under her breath. You saw me then? I've always seen you. She touched his wrist. Then stay. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. I'm not going anywhere. And when he kissed her, it didn't feel like a beginning or an ending. It felt like the moment everything fell into place. Chapter 10. The stage that belonged to her. Savannah had never felt smaller, and more hers. The spring gala at City Hall was once the Yates family's favorite photo op. Tonight, it was something else entirely. Because tonight, the mayor had one name engraved on the marble program. Jane Esther Yates, Distinguished Citizen Award, Arts and Innovation. Ryder had offered to fly her in first class. She chose the train. She wanted to see the country pass by, to remember how far she'd come. Inside the Grand Rotunda, every chair was full. 100 Savannah elite, 100 old ghosts. Claire Yates sat stiffly beside her parents in the second row. She hadn't spoken publicly in months, ever since the plagiarism scandal ended her scholarship. Harold looked tired, Suzanne smaller. And when Jane walked out under the white spotlight, their eyes locked. But she didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just stepped up to the microphone and took her place. I grew up believing I didn't deserve good things. That love had to be earned. That silence meant strength. That family was something you either got lucky with or lived without. Is in the crowd. Learn that family is a choice. That dignity isn't about money. That kindness isn't weakness. And that power doesn't always wear a suit. She paused. The room leaned in. 3 years ago, I stood outside a house where people told me I didn't belong. Tonight, I stand here because I stopped knocking. Applause. Stained? Real. She turned toward the mayor, who handed her the award. She held it for a moment, then looked back at the crowd. I want to thank my adoptive grandmother, who taught me that grace is louder than grief. I want to thank the friends who fed me, believed me, and never asked me to be less. She glanced toward Ryder, seated in the front row, hands folded, a quiet fire in his eyes. I want to thank the man who never saved me, but stood still long enough for me to choose to rise. The applause rose again. But Jane wasn't done. She stepped forward. One more thing, she said. And the room held its breath. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the moon pendant. I used to wear this when I was invisible. Now I wear it because I know who I am. She lifted the chain and fastened it around her neck. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like thunder. This is the last time I'll ever explain myself. Outside, the moon was full. Ryder waited for her by the reflecting pool. I've never seen you like that, he said. Like what? Unapologetic. She smiled. It felt good. He offered his hand. She took it. They walked together to the car waiting at the curb. Before she got in, she turned. Wait. Ryder paused. What is it? She stepped close, closer than ever, and whispered, I love you. He didn't speak. He just kissed her. Not as the girl they forgot. Not as the designer they praised. But as the woman she became, on the stage that finally belonged to her, what she chose. They used to call her the girl no one claimed. An orphan of convenience. Shadow in second-hand shoes. That names are only powerful if you believe them. And Jane? She stopped believing the moment she chose herself. She didn't build an empire overnight. She built mornings. One sketch. One cup of coffee. One promise to never shrink again. When Ryder asked her to marry him, he didn't kneel. He held out his hand, open, steady. You don't have to change. You don't have to run. You just have to stay. And Jane, with tears slipping quietly down her cheek, whispered, only if you promise the same. They got married in Savannah, not in a ballroom, and at the edge of the garden where Grandma Esther once sat stringing moonflowers into thread. Her dress was simple, her vows were handwritten. She didn't wear diamonds. The ring she designed herself. Moonstone, gold, and a single carved line inside. Even in the dark, I found the light. And she never went back to the Yates estate. But she did run into Claire one day, years later, at a conference where Jane was keynote and Claire was working the door. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because Jane had learned by then that closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from peace. She became what they feared most. Unbought, unbroken, and unforgettable. And through her foundation, she gave scholarships to girls who had walked through similar gates, only to be turned away. She didn't save them. She reminded them they were never lost to begin with. In the end, Jane didn't rewrite her past. She built a future that made the past irrelevant. A life not made of revenge, but of wholeness. A love not built on rescuing, but on rising side by side. And if you're still watching, maybe this story found you for a reason. Maybe you've known what it feels like to be passed over, to be underestimated, to be told you should be grateful for crumbs. But hear this clearly, gently, completely. You are not what they called you. You are what you kept choosing to become. And love, real love, will never ask you to earn your place. It will stand beside you, in the light you made for yourself. If this story reminded you of someone, send it to her. Not for views, not for comments, just to say, you were always worthy. I see you now. Because sometimes, the most powerful love story of all is the one where a girl becomes her own home.